The untold story of Lucifer, from heaven's brightest to hell's curse. Satan was once the most dazzling light in heaven. Now he is the shadow that hunts your soul. He didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he believed he could be God. But one truth shattered his lie. No throne built on pride can stand before the Almighty. This is not just Satan's story. It's the war waging inside every heart. And today you must choose which voice you follow. The first light and perfect beauty. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Before evil ever whispered its first deception, before mankind ever took breath or stepped upon the dust of the earth, heaven was a place of unimaginable peace. A realm beyond time, beyond flaw, where every angel burned with holy fire and poured out endless praise to their Creator. In that sacred order of divine harmony, there was no shadow, only radiance, only reverence, only the eternal presence of the Most High. Among the countless multitudes that filled the celestial courts, one being stood apart, not for rebellion, not yet, but for glory, for majesty, for the unmistakable stamp of divine craftsmanship. His name was Lucifer, and he was the masterpiece. He was the firstborn of created glory, the brightest reflection of the Creator's intention. Cloaked in light, crowned with wisdom, Lucifer walked among the blazing stones of heaven's holy mountain. His form shimmered with jewels of eternal flame. His voice rang like the choirs of 1,000 stars, and his presence drew admiration like gravity draws the planets. The other angels did not envy him. They adored him, revered him, for Lucifer was not just a marvel. They believed he was the vessel through which God displayed his joy. The scriptures whisper of his excellence in fragments, rare and trembling with awe. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created. He was not just another angel. He was the morning star, the one who led the hosts of heaven in worship. His voice was like a river of fire, rising to the throne with a power that stirred every soul around him. When he lifted his arms in praise, galaxies seemed to spin in rhythm. When he sang, even the winds of heaven stood still. God himself delighted in him. Lucifer was adorned not only with beauty but with authority. It was said that the symphony of heaven followed his lead. Cherubim moved in harmony with his gestures. Seraphim responded to the cadence of his words. Archangels like Michael looked upon him not with jealousy but with awe. But this is not a story of glory forever. No, this is the beginning of a tragedy. A divine drama so cosmic, so heartbreaking that it would fracture eternity. For though Lucifer was the light-bearer within him, a crack would soon appear. And through that crack, darkness would enter heaven, but not yet. In this beginning, there was only beauty, only light, only a love too vast to measure. And at the center of it all stood one, crafted by God's own hand, who radiated such magnificence that heaven called him the first among all created beings. Lucifer, the name itself meant light bringer. And in those early days, that name fit perfectly. But even the brightest star, when it forgets its source, begins to fall. And so the stage was set. Not for a mere rebellion, but for the greatest betrayal heaven would ever know. Not with weapons, not with force, but with pride. And before the war in heaven would erupt, before swords would clash in lightning and flame, there was simply this. One light shining brighter than all the rest. A masterpiece, a marvel, a warning. The greatest of God's creations standing on the edge of eternity, and the fall had not yet begun. The seed of pride and the whisper of self-glory. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty. It began with a glance, not outward but inward. Lucifer, once the morning star who led creation in worship, began to pause, just slightly, when lifting his eyes toward the throne. Where once his gaze had been fixed on the radiance of God, now it lingered on the glow of his own reflection. He noticed how light clung to him longer than to others, how angels looked to him not only with respect but admiration, how every word he spoke shaped the rhythm of heaven's worship, and quietly, without sound or scar, a seed was planted. Pride, it didn't erupt, it unfolded. Like smoke curling from an unseen fire, Lucifer didn't yet reject God. But he began to question. In the hidden chambers of his mind, he wondered, if I shine this brightly, if my voice commands the heavens, if I reflect such glory, am I not more than a servant? He never said it aloud, not then. But he started to listen more to his own beauty than to the praises of God. The worship he once led with joy became routine. The awe that once lifted his spirit now fed a different hunger, a desire to be noticed, not for who he reflected, but for who he believed he had become. And God, in his mercy, spoke to him. It was not thunder, it was not fire. It was the voice of a father who loved his child. Lucifer, my son, I see your thoughts. You are forgetting the source of your light. Lucifer bowed, outwardly reverent. But inside, the spark of discomfort grew. Why does he question me? Can he not see my loyalty? Does he not know I was made with this brilliance? He looked away, quietly resisting. God warned him again, gently. Remember, the beauty in you is mine reflected. Do not believe it comes from within. You were made to shine, yes, but to shine with my light, not your own. Lucifer smiled, but the fire inside him was no longer holy. His silence spoke louder than rebellion. He withdrew not in body, but in spirit. The angels began to sense it. Gabriel approached him once. Brother, your light feels distant. What stirs in your heart? Lucifer answered with a half-truth. There are thoughts even angels cannot share, depths we are yet to understand. He turned away, and for the first time the morning star felt alone, but it was not heaven that changed, it was him. He had turned from reflection to self-regard, from worship to self-admiration, from offering glory to receiving it, and the whisper in his mind grew louder. What if I am more than they say? What if I was meant for something greater? What if glory should not flow through me? But to me, this was no fall, not yet, but the path had been chosen. Pride had found its voice, and Lucifer, still radiant, still adored, began walking toward a shadow that only he could see. The great revelation and the beginning of rebellion. I will make myself flesh, and they shall worship me. Heaven stood in holy silence. The throne blazed with a glory deeper than before. The angels gathered, not with wings spread in battle, but in wonder. Something was coming, something never seen, never imagined. Then the voice of the Almighty thundered like a river of fire. I will create a new realm, a world of matter, of dust and breath. I will form living beings made in my image, and from that dust I will take on flesh. I will walk among them. Gasps echoed across the heavenly courts, and I will dwell as one of them. The voice continued through my Son. The Word will become flesh. He shall be called Jesus, and in his name every knee shall bow in heaven, on earth, and beneath. At once light filled the heavens with awe. Angels trembled not from fear, but from reverence. They saw galaxies spinning at his command, mountains rising at the sound of his breath, and humanity, fragile yet sacred, standing at the center of his plan. But one did not kneel. Lucifer stood silent. His eyes burned not with wonder but confusion. Then came something darker, a slow growing rejection. A man, a creature of clay and blood, that is who we must worship. The stars still sang, the angels still praised. But for Lucifer the music died. He turned inward, cold and still, as the revelation settled deep into his being. The Son of God would descend not as light but as flesh, not as flame but as a child. And every angel, even the highest, would kneel before him. Lucifer's beauty had once pointed to the glory of God, but now that glory was descending to earth, to weakness, to a body. He could not accept it. He would not. In the silence, he spoke one word, not loud, not angry, but sharp enough to slice the peace of heaven. No. A murmur passed through the ranks of angels. Some froze. Others bowed more deeply, as if to shield themselves from what they had just heard. Lucifer, the morning star, lifted his gaze, not to worship, but to resist. No, not in pride, not in rage, in defiance. He looked not at the sun, but at the throne itself. His face was calm, his heart was burning. Are we the beings of light to kneel before flesh? Are we the guardians of the eternal flame to worship a God who bleeds? He could not comprehend such love, a love that would step down, a love that would be pierced, a love that would die for dust. He turned his back to the light, and in that turning, heaven shuddered. It was no longer a question of pride. It was war against the very heart of God. The seduction and the rising of the rebel host. Why must light bow to flesh? Why must glory kneel to dust? Heaven no longer felt the same. The music of worship still echoed across the skies, but something subtle had shifted. A tension. A pause between hallelujahs, a silence beneath the song. Lucifer walked among the angels, his steps slow, his eyes sharp. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout rebellion. He planted questions. Thoughts that began like whispers but grew like wildfire. Why must we worship what is lower? Is not the flame greater than the clay? Is not the light born of eternity more worthy than flesh destined to die? To the cherubim he spoke of dignity, to the seraphim of freedom. He did not rage, he reasoned, with elegance, with persuasion, with the charisma heaven had always loved in him. What God asks of us is strange, he said, not with bitterness but with wonder. To kneel before a fragile form, to call holiness what bleeds. He drew close to angels who once served beside him, brothers who trusted his wisdom, sisters who followed his lead in the worship of old. And he offered not war, but clarity. Do you not feel it? He would ask. Something is shifting, something that does not belong. He spoke of destiny, of being more, of stepping beyond their place in the order of heaven. Are we not made in splendor? Are we not beings of eternal flame? Why must we bow to a form made of dust and need? Some were disturbed, some withdrew, but others listened. His words did not tear the heavens. They crept into hearts like smoke through a window, subtle, smooth, deadly. He painted the incarnation not as love, but as humiliation. He described the plan of God not as divine mercy, but as a mistake, an insult. To worship flesh is to deny the light within us. It was not rage that drew the first angels to his side. It was reason. He gathered the brightest, the swiftest, the most radiant, not in battle lines, but in quiet agreement. And so it began, not with violence, but with persuasion. The morning star was forming a new order, an army of the admired, a host of the convinced. And heaven, once pure in harmony, now held the faint, rising breath of a coming storm. The counter-declaration of Archangel Michael. Who is like God? The murmurs had spread like a quiet wind across heaven. Whispers carried from choir to choir, from angel to angel. Some trembled, others questioned. And a few, drawn by charisma, began to drift toward Lucifer's light. But then a voice broke through the stillness. Clear, unshaken, 3 words, simple yet blazing like lightning against the storm. Who is like God? The words fell like thunder. Lucifer froze, every eye turned. Standing before the swelling tide of deception was Michael, the one whose very name was the cry itself. Mikael, who is like God? He was not clothed in radiance like Lucifer. He held no political sway, no golden influence over choirs or courts. But his heart burned with unwavering loyalty. And when he spoke again, his voice cut through every veil of confusion. You speak of freedom but twist it into rebellion. You call it dignity, but it is pride. You place yourself beside the throne but forget. You were created, not born of eternity. Lucifer stepped forward, slow and poised, his eyes cold with restrained fury. You are blind, Michael. You cling to chains and call it worship. You serve a God who would lower himself into flesh and ask us to kneel before it. I will not. Michael's gaze did not shift, and that is why you fall. Lucifer's lips curled, the first true trace of bitterness cracking through his calm. You speak like a servant. You think obedience is glory. I was made to shine, and I will not let my light be dimmed beneath the shadow of a broken form. Michael answered, voice low but fierce. You were made to reflect him, but you now desire to replace him. You call it light, but your glow no longer warms, it burns. A hush fell across heaven. Not one angel moved. Lucifer stared at his brother, and for the first time, the hatred beneath his silence became visible. Michael stepped forward again, this time not with rebuke, but with sorrow. Lucifer, you forget. It is not God who lowers himself out of weakness, but out of love. It is not worship that demeans us, but pride that destroys us. Lucifer turned away. No more words, no more reasoning, only the sound of wings shifting, and the great divide was now unspoken but unmistakable. Heaven had heard both voices, the voice of rebellion and the voice of truth. And it would soon choose. War in heaven and the fall of the proud. Heaven trembled, not from thunder, not from wrath, but from choice. The moment came like a storm that had long been building. Two armies stood face to face, one clothed in loyalty, the other in defiance. The skies above eternity shimmered with tension. At the front, Michael raised no blade of fire, no thunderous threat. His armor gleamed not from gold, but from truth. His strength came not from dominance, but from humility. Behind him, the faithful stood, seraphim, cherubim, angels of light whose hearts refused to bow to pride. Across the divide, Lucifer's host glistened with stolen brilliance. Their wings beat not with harmony, but rebellion. Once sons of morning, now shadows twisted by ambition. Lucifer roared, "This is our realm, our light, our glory." Michael answered, his voice calm, unshaken, "Not yours, his." And with that, heaven ignited, but not with swords. Not with divine rage. What clashed that day were not weapons, but wills. Truth struck against deception. Faith battled pride. And what shook the heavens was not force, but the power of love standing against lies. Lucifer's light dimmed. Not by blade, but by the brilliance of what he had rejected. For every boast he made, Michael responded not with fury, but with worship. And that worship became a shield nothing could pierce. Then, with a cry that echoed across the stars, Michael declared, "The Lord rebuke you." In that moment, Lucifer fell, and with him a third of heaven. They were not hurled down by violence, but by truth they could not bear. Heaven did not rejoice. There was no triumph in the fall of a brother, but there was peace, and a silence deeper than any storm. The war was over. The proud were cast down, and the throne of God remained unchallenged, unshaken, and crowned in mercy. The aftermath of rebellion and the fall to earth. Lucifer was cast down, once the bearer of light, now the prince of shadows. He fell not into silence, but into fury. Banished from heaven's glory, he plunged into the abyss, his brilliance shattered, his pride scorched. No longer Lucifer. Now Satan, the adversary, the accuser, the father of lies. Heaven was beyond his reach. But earth became his new battlefield. He could not dethrone God, so he set his eyes on what God loved most. Man, the dust-formed image of the divine, he whispered where trust lived. He poisoned where innocence bloomed. He offered knowledge laced with death, choice wrapped in chains, freedom that led to bondage. And so Eden heard a voice it was never meant to hear, not the roar of beasts, but the hiss of deception. Satan's war had not ended. It had only changed ground. No longer a rebellion in the skies, it became a war within the soul. Wherever there is love, he sows doubt. Wherever there is light, he casts shadow. But he fears one thing above all, not swords, not fire, but the memory of a name once spoken in heaven's court. Who is like God? It was that name that broke him once, and it will be that truth that breaks him again. Satan and the battle for the human soul. You will be like God. Those were the first words of war whispered to humanity, not shouted, not forced, just whispered, and the garden fell silent. Eden, where rivers flowed with peace and trees swayed in praise, now trembled under a lie wrapped in desire. Eve's eyes widened. Adam hesitated, and in that pause, trust unraveled. Satan did not wield a sword, he wielded a question. Did God really say? The fruit was taken, the bite was made, and creation cracked. From that moment, Satan's war shifted into the heart of man. He could not unmake God, so he would unmake the image of God. Centuries later, in a land of dust and ashes, another battlefield emerged. This time it was Job, a righteous man, blameless, devoted. But Satan came not with temptation, but accusation. Strip him of blessings, he said. Take his family, his wealth, his health, he will curse you to your face. And so the test came, but Job did not curse, he wept. He groaned. He sat in the ashes with torn clothes and a broken heart. Yet through cracked lips he whispered, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away, blessed be his name." Satan lost again, but he was not done. Then came the desert, not a garden of trees, not a home of ashes, but wilderness, barren, blistering. And there a man stood, hungry, alone, yet filled with the Spirit. Jesus, the Son. And Satan came again. Turn these stones to bread, leap from the temple. Bow and all kingdoms will be yours. Each temptation was laced with scripture. Each offer coated in power. But the Word stood before the Word. And Jesus answered again and again. It is written, not with anger, not with fear, but with truth. Satan fled, 3 battlegrounds, 3 moments of divine confrontation. Eden. Where man fell, ashes. Where man endured, wilderness. Where the sun stood victorious. And through it all, the enemy never changed his weapon. A whisper, a doubt, a twisted promise, but neither has heaven changed its defense. Truth, faith, and the unshaken name of the one who said, I am. Revelation and the final war in heaven and earth. The great red dragon rose from the shadows. Its tail swept stars from the sky. Its jaws opened not just to devour flesh, but faith. In the book of Revelation, Satan appears no longer cloaked in whispers. He is the dragon, ancient, furious, and desperate. Cast from heaven but not from war, he unleashes his final weapons. A beast from the sea, powerful, blasphemous, crowned with 10 horns. A beast from the earth, deceptive, performing signs, making fire fall from the sky. Together they demand worship, not love, not truth, but fear. The dragon gives them power and the world bows. The mark is set. The faithful are hunted. The battlefield now spans every heart, every nation, but heaven does not remain silent. Once again, Michael rises, the archangel of truth. Not with thunder or armies of gold, but with the authority of the Most High. There is no political speech, no strategy of men, just war, righteous, final. Michael leads the armies of heaven. The Lamb stands on Mount Zion. The cry of the saints echoes under the altar, and the sky itself is torn open. The dragon fights back, fierce, blazing, determined to devour one last time, but light does not reason with darkness, it ends it. Fire falls, chains are forged. And Satan, the deceiver of nations, is seized. No more disguises, no more lies, he is cast into the lake of fire, not for a season, not for a time, forever. The beast falls, the false prophet burns, evil is silenced. And then a voice from the throne declares what the war was always about. Behold, the dwelling of God is with man. The final victory is not just defeat over darkness. It is the return of the garden, a new heaven, a new earth. And no serpent will ever speak again. A message of hope in the aftermath of war. Even light, when severed from its source, becomes darkness. That is the story of Lucifer. Once clothed in radiance, he fell not because he lacked beauty or brilliance, but because he tried to possess what only God could give: worship. He wanted the throne, but lost the kingdom. And yet this is not just his story, it is ours. Every heart carries a battlefield. Pride still whispers with honeyed tones. Rebellion still wears the mask of freedom. But so does humility stand, quiet, unwavering, like Michael. Michael did not win with might. He did not rise by ambition. He stood firm by faith. He overcame because he knelt first. Because loyalty, even when mocked, becomes armor. Because truth, even when outnumbered, remains victorious. The war between pride and love continues, not in the heavens, but in kitchens and classrooms, in secret thoughts and silent prayers. Each day, we are offered the same choice: to bow like Michael, or rise like Lucifer and fall. But hope is not lost. The Lamb still reigns. The throne is still occupied, and the gate of heaven is still open for those who choose the light, not to own it, but to reflect it. This is not just a tale of angels. It is a call to courage, a whisper to the weary, that even when shadows press in, even when the dragon seems near, faith still wins. Humility still shines, and love will always outlast the darkness. And so, Lucifer's fall reminds us all. Even the brightest light can become darkness when it strays from God. But it also reminds us that the path of humility, faith, and obedience will never be forgotten in heaven. May this story stir your heart to choose light over pride, love over rebellion, and truth over temptation. Because this battle isn't just ancient, it's within us every single day. If this touched your spirit, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What did God's message speak to you today? And stay with us, because in the coming videos, we'll reveal more hidden truths, divine mysteries, and forgotten stories from Scripture that could change your spiritual life forever. God bless you, and see you in the next chapter.